It is 20 minutes after 11 o'clock. You're inside Brunch at 107.5 music, 107.7, we keep doing that, 107.7 Music for Life. It is great to have you with us, and we're talking the issues that we know affect you. One of the things you found out as we dealt with campaign finance before is that we are not looking at what the so-called sexy topics. We're looking for context, we're looking for conversation. We moved into the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association to deal with what's relevant to you, what you need to know. And in the theme of that relevance, we have our next guest, Mr. David Abdullah. Sharmain?
David, good morning and welcome to our studios for the first time.
Yes, thanks.
And we have the caption or the headline that we put on this discussion is MSJ blowing in the wind, blowing with the wind, question marks. Is with or go with, the MSJ because, sure. And I want to take this discussion back to 5 years ago. When you were at the forefront of the People's Democracy Movement, it was,
right.
And the protest against the property tax, which engaged you eventually with the People's Partnership Government, yeah? And then you went on, you stayed for a while, you got disgruntled and you left, and then you are looking different quarters right now. So let's go back to the whole property tax issue. Where is that? Because people don't talk about it anymore. Have you dropped it? Where is that? And we move from there.
Okay, well, before that, let me just say thanks for having me. Good to see some old friends. Sharmain, of course, I haven't seen for a while. She remember it was 5 years ago. I didn't remember. That's a long time.
Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
Given that in politics, a week is a long time.
I was standing
in Trinidad and Tobago. And Rennie, great to see you. We've been on Facebook over a period and so on. And you did an interview with me when you were in New York a couple of years ago. But I remember many, many moons ago, the old Radio Trinidad, 7:30 a.m. as it was in those days.
You trying to expose me? Trying to bust me?
But those were interesting times as well.
Yes,
so it's good to be on air with both of you all. Okay, let's fast forward, go backwards if you want to 5 years ago. Yes, December 2009, and I was arrested, I think, on the 18th of December, or the 17th, one of those dates there. And the Parliament was debating the property tax, as it was popularly called, and I was arrested, and a number of colleagues were brutalized by the police, were beaten by the police, and so on. And that, of course, was one of the many moments politically where people in the country were expressing their disagreement in very strong ways with the Patrick Manning government, because the view was that the Manning government had become far too autocratic, not listening to the people, engaged in a policy direction that did not address fundamentally the problems that people were having in their communities around roads and water and housing and so many other things like that, the crisis in the healthcare sector, and was intent on a development paradigm or development concept which was about constructing, mega projects, big buildings, Taruba Stadium, Napa, Sapa, the waterfront, and so on. All of these projects, which people could not make any direct connection with in terms of their standard of living, their quality of life. And that the Manning government was also intent on undermining the public service, hence the establishment of a revenue authority, which was part of the legislation with respect to the property tax and so on, establishing a revenue authority, and therefore getting rid of Board of Inland Revenue and Customs. And then on the other hand, other areas of undermining the public service through contract work, through the establishment of special purpose companies to do the work that would normally be done by the public service, and therefore get around public procurement legislation, the topic you're discussing with Margaret Rose, using special purpose companies like UDCOT. Of course, UDCOT is the most infamous or famous of them all, with Call the Heart and so on. But which companies did not fall under the requirements of the Central Tenders Board, and which would establish their own tender rules and procedures, and therefore would expend taxpayers' money off book. In other words, not being accountable to the Parliament through government ministries and line ministers and so on. So that was the general mood of the country, and that resulted in And Phyton was in the forefront. That was the trade union group that I was leading, Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs. And Phyton was in the forefront of that protest movement. We had begun with high food prices, a sustained campaign around high food prices before that, and took up more general issues, and that led to the People's Democracy in October of 2009, and then into the property tax protests, and then Phyton was invited by then leader of the opposition, newly elected in March of 2010, Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, to meet with her and a small team. We met with her at the OBQ headquarters, and then she extended an invitation to me as president of Phyton to speak at a rally which she was organizing in Safe Park in Chaguanas, which was held at the end of March. I don't remember the exact date. Farmers' crops were bulldozed in Das Trace and Enterprise and on Pineapple Smith lands up in Aruka, Maloney area. And so that was one clear case. And interestingly, then Minister of Agriculture, Vassam Barrett, he himself expressed dismay about it. I was part of a demonstration in solidarity with farmers. That was one instance. So I was still a member of the government as a senator. There was the issue of the 5% cap on salary, that in terms of the collective agreements that were being negotiated by the state, both as state enterprises and as government CPO and so on. And of course, the trade unions opposed the imposition of a cap. That was another issue. And I demonstrated with trade unions and so on and spoke at rallies against that and spoke in caucuses against it and so on. In fact, I had a very heated exchange with then Minister Dukaran about that. There was the issue of the state of emergency. The MSJ made a public statement calling for the regulations to the state of emergency to be amended, because if the reason, quote unquote, for the state of emergency was to deal with some gang and drug and crime, murders and so on, there was no reason to have in the regulations the banning of public meetings and demonstrations and so on, which have civic activities having nothing to do with criminal activities. But they didn't take that on. And there were other things. Corruption, major. The Faizabad Declaration put forward very clear principles and values. Honesty, no politicization of the state sector and the public service, and that no discrimination. All of those things were happening. People were losing their jobs because they were perceived to be PNM and so on. On what basis? Perhaps race only.
And I thank you and Sharmain for allowing me to indulge in that, because there are many who would ask the questions, well, did you make a mistake then and you're coming back to us this time asking us to pay attention when you made a bad judgment? But I think you just clarified, and that's the reason I ask you to elaborate on what was the reason that you left out.
Yeah, I mean, we went in on the basis of agreed policy positions. And when we realized that we couldn't hold the UNC to account on those policy positions, we left. Now, mistakes were made, I think, by not just MSJ. I think that both Mr. Dukran and Mr. McLeod, who were the leaders of the COP and the MSJ respectively at the time, and members of the cabinet, could have in the very early days put their foot down and ensured that the government did not go by way of excess and so on. And there are countless examples I could give you of that, but time wouldn't permit. But they allowed latitude. And the old saying, once you give an inch, they take a mile. And so the UNC felt, and the corrupt elements within the UNC felt that there was nobody to rein them in, and therefore they started running like horses faster and faster.
You either bend the tree or you have to cut it down. That's what we are saying.
But David, but therefore you have answered what she gave as her parting shot in response to your parting shot. She says that you remain trapped in isolationist thinking. You cannot negotiate governance like a labor union leader representing the interests of only one group. Were you doing that?
Not at all. If you're talking about corruption, that doesn't deal with workers, one group. You're dealing now with, and Margaret Rose, I think, dealt with that earlier. You're dealing now with the stealing of taxpayers' money, essentially, to benefit a greedy few. Financiers of the party, and so on and so on and so on. If you're dealing with the absence of constitutional reform in a significant way, that's general. So no, the issues that we put on the agenda were very broad-based, and it came directly from the manifesto and the Faisal Declaration. If you say you're not going to politicize the state enterprises and the public service, and then people whose contracts came to an end were not renewed and a whole set of other people came in, then that's something different. If you say, for example, why is this radio station, not this particular one, why is radio station X and media house Y getting advertisements when we perceive them to be PNM supported, and the next day advertisements are pulled from ministries and state enterprises, you're discriminating.
Yeah.
And that is not what the country voted for in 2010. That is not what we were part of the partnership for. So no, and I'll tell you, the Prime Minister actually did call me a couple of days after I left. Of course, she will say, because she said then David will say, so I'll deny it. So she could deny it if she wants, but I know that she called me, and I suppose phone records could be tracked back to 2012. And she called me to say, well, that I'm an idealist and she's a realist. But then if we don't dream, if we don't have ideals, then we settle for the dregs. And we are not about to settle for the dregs.
And what would
dregs in terms of values, principles, vision of transformation.
And where does that leave you with Aaron McLeod, your comrade?
I haven't spoken to him
decades?
for almost 3 years. The last time I spoke to him was around the 12th of July 2012. I'm having a word with him for almost 3 years. He is not and has not been a member of the MSJ for many years. Even when he was the leader, he didn't come to many meetings. He absented himself from more meetings than he attended. But more importantly, he does not represent the MSJ in any form or fashion, and has not done so from 2012.
Well, you're now sitting at a table with Ramesh Lawrence Maraj and people whom you would have protested against and who you would have had reservations about previously, whom we all as a nation would have had reservations about by their politics and beyond that as well. Which brings into the issue of credibility, which is why we've put the headline on this is blowing with the wind MSJ. Is this, and then she described you as being ambitious, which I don't agree, knowing your work in the social sector. But where does that leave you? Are you going with just because the PNM is the only alternative that you're walking with them today? Or can the MSJ walk its own path and be relevant there?
We're walking our own path. We are part of the roundtable coming out of Section 34. I actually convened this broader grouping called the Roundtable, which meets from time to time and so on, and engages in joint activities, joint actions. And the PNM is a member of the Roundtable because quite clearly the issue of Section 34 was one which both the PNM, the MSJ, the trade unions and other groups that are members of the Roundtable all had a common position on. So it's an issues-based network, if you wish. It is not a coalition, it is not an alliance, there's no pact between us and so on. Though Dr. Rowley and I do converse from time to time, not all the time, but we converse from time to time with respect to the round table. But you have to understand what the round table is. It is a network that comes together around specific issues of governance or problems of governance that are where we have a common position on. Now, for example, there was the March for Chaguaramas 2 on the 9th of May, where we walked from West Mall, just opposite West Mall, to Chaguaramas. And that was organized not by the Round Table, but by the Save Our Chaguaramas group. The MSJ is a member, the PNM is not a member of that. There are a number of other groups like the Emancipation Support Committee, the Black Caucus, the Tacarigua Save Our Savannah group, and so on. So there are a number of the farmers, obviously Guave Road farmers, the Chaguaramas Tenants Association, and other groups are members of this Save Our Chaguaramas group. Now, the PNM joined the march. Other people, Mr. Warner joined the march. Nicole Dyer-Griffith and some members of AOI joined the march.
Concerned citizens,
so,
yes.
And exactly. So it's an issue, and others can join in if they feel they could identify with
there
the
is
issue.
a degree of political maturity that the populists would expect of their leaders. I would expect you to speak to the Prime Minister if she called you or anybody else, or Mr. Manning or anybody else. At the end of the day, that level of political maturity is something you expect. Anybody who's observing politics and trying to understand it, be looking for a common Trinidad and Tobago, will understand this. I want to go into an area that the Prime Minister is saying, looking at the fortunes of Trinidad and Tobago, that we're not into a recession. You've been been warning for a long time that we are not taking the necessary, making the necessary adjustments for an impending recession and what the effect it will have on the citizenry. Where is the disconnect here? Why is the PM saying we have nothing to worry about, and you're saying, and what particular adjustments are you referring to when you say we need to have adjustments done now?
Yeah, sure. Key question. Well, the Governor of the Central Bank did announce just a few days ago that for the first quarter of 2015, there was negative growth, which means that the pie shrank, right? And it is going to shrink again in the second quarter relative to the first one, given the fact that we have lower oil and gas prices. Therefore, we are generating less income as a country, and therefore the pie is shrinking. That's reality. Now, quite apart from the problem of loss of national income, because we're producing less value in terms of goods because oil and gas prices are down and so on. We also have the situation where government revenue is down, because the government, of course, budgeted initially in September last year for the 2015 period for $80 oil price, and they ratcheted that down to $45. So government revenue is going to be down, and therefore the government has less money to spend on projects, which means now they're trying to cover that by selling some of the crown jewels. So some of the money the fact that the Minister of Finance could say he ran a small budget surplus and not a deficit is because they got an inflow of money that came out of CLICO, the sale of CL Financial assets. Because, there was the sale by arbitration of the very valuable Methanol Holdings Limited company, very, very valuable company. And that went back to the government. So they got an inflow of cash of several billion US dollars and so on. So that helped them to balance the budget. And then they want to go now with this initial share offer and so on with respect to Phoenix Park. Now, it's a bad time to sell. Well, we disagree with the sale in any case because it's a profitable company, but it's a bad time to sell because you don't sell when prices are low. When prices are low, the value of your asset declines, and therefore the price that you will get is a lower price than if this market is very buoyant. And it's a fire sale then, but they want to sell because that will give them some more cash again to finance the deficit. So it's like you having an income of $1,000 a month, and you are paying some of your bills, but you don't pay all your bills at the end of the day, and you have $5 left in your pocket at the end of the month, and you say, well, I'm doing okay, I have a surplus of $5, but you have a surplus because you didn't pay the light bill, you didn't pay the phone bill, and so on, and therefore, if you had paid those bills, you couldn't because you'd be in debt. That's what the government has, because they're owing money which is why they went back for this additional money recently to pay public servants and teachers and so on.
But was it additional money, or they were just moving around the money from the Ministry of Finance? Wasn't that?
Well, they're moving it around, but the question is, where was the money originally allocated that is now not going to get it? And I now don't know that we have all of those details. It may have been in the budget, in the documents that were laid in Parliament, but those weren't provided. But what is going to happen is that ultimately the government's budget position is going to run into deficit given lower revenues from oil and gas and the levels of expenditure. But there's a third, more crucial area, which is foreign exchange. And David Dullal-Whiteway, head of Republic Bank, made a statement last week, which was very telling. And he said that with lower oil and gas prices, we are bound to run into a foreign exchange problem because we are consuming as a country too much. Motor cars, look at the malls, look at people buying, fast food. Every time you buy a box of chicken and chips from KFC, money goes out of Trinidad and Tobago because you have to pay the franchise, people and so on.
Almost everything is a foreign franchise,
right. So food import bill is going up. So all of these things, our consumption of foreign exchange is huge. And when the flow of foreign exchange coming into the economy goes down, we're going to run into a balance of payments problems at some point in time, and then that is when the crunch is going to hit. Well, first of all, in terms of government expenditure, we propose a reduction of that 0.14 to San Fernando highway, which is really two highways. In fact, we did a tour as a round table just a few days ago on Corpus Christi on Thursday. And significant sections of the controversial part of the highway, which is between Pinal and Mont Desir have not even been started. And we are saying it's unnecessary to start. That's very
Excuse
expensive.
us, right.
And the section between Debe and Pinal, they've put in a lot of soil on the swampy area and so on. But that could also be not as extensive as originally designed.
Which run that section that runs parallel to the Mosquito Creek? Is that
No. This is between Debe and Pinal. So this is going in a number of through the low-lying areas in those communities in the back of Pinal and so on. So that is one area where we could reduce expenditure. Quite clearly, with the type of procurement that is going on and what we understand to be the level of kickbacks and so on, we could save a lot of money if there's proper public procurement. Government advertising could be reduced in terms of all the ads in the newspapers, which is really part of the election campaign, so that there are areas for reduction in government expenditure. In terms of the country, as a country, we need to have a serious dialogue. This now is not about party in power. This is about country. We need to have a serious dialogue about the state of the economy. But unfortunately, the government has no moral authority to convene or initiate such a dialogue. But we need a dialogue so that as a country, we could begin to say, let us begin to cut back on this consumption of foreign exchange. Let us increase our output of locally produced goods, and including food and so on, and ensure that we conserve foreign exchange. Let us provide economic incentives to business people to earn foreign exchange. Let us encourage people to bring back into the country US dollars that they are banking in the United States and elsewhere. Let us have a real dialogue. Let us discuss the issue of productivity in the context of workers now having real power of decision making at the workplace and transforming the relations of power at the workplace.
Thank you very much for making that very clear, yes.
David, while you're speaking about let us bring back U.S. money into the country, I would use this opportunity to say that the BBC this morning unveiled that $4.8 million US was brought here into GTA supermarkets.
I saw that report early this morning.
Yeah, so therefore a significant amount. GTA supermarkets, a large chain in Trinidad, received $4.860 for $4,860,000 from the accounts as the money paid.
I don't know what all the facts are. What I suspect was going on is that quite clearly a company like GTA, which is importing and so on, wants foreign exchange, and so Mr. Warner probably had an arrangement with them to give them US dollars. He got what BBC said. They then gave him back TT dollars in exchange. And so they simply operated as a broker, which
broker for want of a nicer word.
In other words,
for want of a better word. Broker is a nice word rather. Right.
In other words, we don't know that JTA was involved directly in acts of corruption, but what they were clearly doing is exchanging TT dollars for US dollars. In other words, they were functioning as a bank, right?
Go further. Keep the discussion going, which takes you into.
They were functioning as a bank, so they got US dollars, and then gave Warner TT dollars. Now, what he then did with the TT dollars is what the key question is.
Well, I do have laundry to do today, but go ahead.
That is the key question. But, for example, if you go into some stores and so on, you can pay a bill with US dollars. And then they may even give you back change in TT dollars, if depending, and so on. And then they use that US dollars for whatever they want to use it for. So one would have to find out from the regulatory authorities, including the Financial Intelligence Unit. That is where now the issue comes in. Whether FIU, the laws under the FIU, is in terms of our financial arrangements, were being breached by JTA and/or Mr. Warner. And I can't say that off the top of my head, and I don't want to make a categorical statement because I only saw the report this morning.
Yeah, and none of us would would be able to say that, really, right? We just get that information from the BBC. But what I'm saying, your analysis of the economy and all of that, it goes with what's there on paper and what's there. But we all know in Trinidad, and you do know, right? You've operated outside of the system for quite a number of years to be able to know that we have an underground economy in Trinidad that's perhaps stronger and more solid than our economy. But how do you the reality of what Trinidad life is. When how do you address that in politics? Because your politics seems so clean and clear cut.
Well, the MSJ has a very detailed policy document. I have a copy of it. It's about 100 and something pages. We still have some sections to write. And we did address that whole issue of white-collar crime. And what we have to do is have a major assault on white-collar crime at the level of the BIR and customs and so on. For example, Chuck Blazer was caught initially not on FIFA issues, but on IRS issues. And they clearly squeezed him where it hurt on IRS, and then he gave up FIFA, right? That seems to me what happened. And so if a business place has established, or there's a business place that you see the edifice and, not much activity is taking place there, how did they come by that? Now, the Proceeds of Crime Act actually provide for you to seize the assets of someone if they can prove how they got it.
That is almost like the Capone model. It has been used for many years.
Precisely. And that's what we have to do. Taxes, similarly, people not paying taxes. And I had a conversation with someone who, is in a position of serious authority where this comes in, where this is, and said, well, why don't you go after all these people? And his response was, well, those are the business people who fund the party. So if we go after them for taxes, they would make the country.
So we found out that the MSJ is not blowing with the wind. They are firmly grounded in the ideology activism, isn't it, David?
Yes, and fighting for social justice.
Congratulations on that. And as we close off brunch today, we've had Margaret Rose opening our program, attorney Margaret Rose, and her message is get up, stand up, ask your candidate where he's getting his money from as we move painfully slowly towards campaign finance reform. And the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association, Raymond Timke, football after Jack Warner, and he says they're actually on the road to reforming that association.